Okay, I'm going to begin. My name's Tony Bandiero. I'm the Executive Director of the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Transportation. We are putting on this presentation today in conjunction with the Pittsburgh Region Clean Cities, who Rick Price is the Executive Director. Say hi, Rick.
Hello,
There's
welcome.
Rick. And with eBoost as well. So a little housekeeping before we start. Please mute yourself when you come in. Hopefully, mostly you are muted so we can hear these presenters. And then what we're going to do is with questions, we're going to hold at the end of the session, we're going to have 20 minutes for questions and answers. But if you have a question and during the particular section, just type it in the chat. So that way you don't forget it, and we know we'll go through the chat and go through all the questions for our presenters. So we're going to get started right now. Again, my name is Tony Bandiero, Executive Director for the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Transportation. We are part of the Department of Energy's Clean Cities program. So there's a lot of people that we know in the audience, and there's a lot of people that we don't know. So what we normally do in our presentations is kind of give a little introduction about the Clean Cities program. And this is just a 10,000-foot overview so everybody can get an idea of who we are and what we do. And then we're going to get right into the presentation with eBoost. Okay, so these little blue kind of bulleted points are what we're going to go over here. So we are part of the Department of Energy's Clean Cities program. Our organization, the Eastern Side, has been a member since 1993. And Rick's organization, Pittsburgh Region Clean Cities, since 1995. So we're going on our 30-year anniversary. We started when the program started back in 1993. The overall mission is to reduce petroleum consumption within the transportation sector using alternatives to gasoline and diesel. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you can see those green tags, and those are the alternative fuels that we support as Clean Cities. We also support other petroleum reduction technologies such as anti-idling programs, GPS, and right size vehicle planning. So there's other ways that we also reduce petroleum within the transportation sector. And one thing I want to mention here is that that's mainly our concentration is the transportation sector. We do get involved in solar and other things when they relate to electric charging stations, but for the most part, we are just concentrated in transportation, mainly with fleets, and then with the electric vehicles, we are definitely doing consumer. So moving right along, we're both 501c3 nonprofits. So we run our business as a nonprofit. We don't sell vehicles, we don't sell fuel, we don't, but what we're good at is putting projects together. So we're kind of Switzerland in this whole process, and what our goal is really to get the vehicles on the road and get the technologies out there. We're comprised of public, private companies, state and local governments, municipalities and utilities, as well as colleges and universities and other members of our organization. Since we are nonprofits, we assist with grants and incentives, vouchers, and rebates. So we're good at putting these projects together. So we'll get a project together and get a bunch of different participants in with us. And then what we're good at is kind of project running that through the grant program. Please, if you join, please put yourself on mute. And like I said, we are being recorded, and the questions, if you have questions, there'll be a 20-minute question and answer session at the end. So some of the other things that we do: technical assistance, being part of the Department of Energy. We have a technical response team. We work with all the labs, NREL, Oregon. So if you have any technical questions, we're really good at getting that information for you. And then the other things we do is project management, like I was talking before about the grant management programs. And then what our biggest feature is our education and outreach. We put on workshops. Rick and I regularly do at least 10 each in our part of Pennsylvania. So here's how it breaks down between EPACT and PRCC. So you see that red line delineates the regions that we cover. EPACT covers 34 counties on the central and eastern side of the state, and Rick's Pittsburgh Region Clean Cities covers 33 counties. So you can see that's how we split up the state. We did this about about 8 years ago is when we actually got full approval from the Department of Energy to increase our region. So one of the things I really wanted to go through before you get into the program is that, you know, some of this technology is getting expensive. So like I said, there's grants and funding mechanisms that we are familiar with that we help our stakeholders get funding for. And these are just some of the ones that are out there that you may be interested in if you're interested in pursuing electric vehicle charging in the future, and we can certainly help you guys with these programs. So the U.S. Department of Energy, who sponsors our programs, always comes up with funding opportunity announcements. I don't know if there's any out currently right now, but they're coming real soon. The U.S. Federal Highway Administration has the alternative fuel corridors, which Rick and I and the state of Pennsylvania have been doing for, I think, about 5 years now, Rick, 6 years. And just want to let you know that all the interstates in Pennsylvania are designated as alternative fuel corridors by the Federal Highway. So that's part of the reason we're having this conversation today. This year, they formed a joint office of energy and transportation. So the Federal Highway and Department of Energy formed a new office for this National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or the NEVI formula. So the program entails $5 billion over 5 years. Pennsylvania is getting $1.71 million of that money over the 5 years. And then the $2.5 billion in discretionary funds. All states can compete for that. And then we work with the EPA, the federal EPA. So there's a Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, which is about $5 million a year. And then they just came out with the Clean School Bus Program, which is $5 billion over 5 years, and 2.5 of that needs to go to electric. And then the state itself has some funding mechanisms. This grant, the Alternative Fuel Incentive Grant, or AFIG, usually produces between 5 and 6 million. I heard through the grapevine that there's going to be a little bit less money this year, but that program should be opening any day now. And these are the 3 categories usually that program covers: vehicle retrofits or purchase, alternative fuel refueling infrastructure, and innovative technology. So if you have any projects for this type of thing, those are the categories that you can apply for. And then the other program that the state has is Driving PA Forward, which equates to the Volkswagen settlement dollars. And those bulleted points that you see there are the different categories. I think the only one that's open now is the electric charging, public electric charging. It's a voucher program, but all the rest aren't open yet, and they should open pretty quickly. So that's all I have to say. Here's our contact information, because I want to get right into the presentation. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But if you have any questions, again, for this presentation, write them in the chat. And then at the end of the eBoost presentation, we will get into the question and answer section. Okay, we good? All right, so I wanted to introduce really fast Leanna Fokshinanu, and she will introduce her team and we'll give you the presentation. Take it away, Leanna.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tony, for the very gracious presentation. And thank you, Rick, for having us and for making us known to all your community as much as possible. We have in front of you a team that will provide you about 60 years of experience in the alternative energy, the whole team together, not each one of us. We have Gio American, who is the president and CEO of the company, and Scott Bradley, who's director of sales. And I don't want to take the time from the presentation itself, so I'm going to ask Scott to start, ask Gio actually to start the presentation, and then we'll go to Scott.
Thank you, Leanna. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Tony and Rick, EPACT and PRCC for putting this together. Secondly, Pennsylvania, you guys are very lucky. You have one of the most energetic CCC teams. So with that in mind, I'll get started. So we all know we're at the forefront of energy transition. We've got renewables coming forward. And at the heart of it, all of this is grid resilience and reliability. And it's on the minds of millions of Americans. So here we're facing the rapid transition to EVs, and we are faced with all the consequences we have around from climate change. So in the West, it may be wildfires. In the South, maybe hurricanes. You've got flooding in the Midwest, and you pick, you're in America. And at the heart of this is the grid, right? It's there through all of these. And so we talk about how do we handle this transition. So the concerns for the utilities and governing bodies are growing. And we have a picture of what it is today, EV infrastructure, outlook of how it'll be tomorrow, and in the very near future. So given all of this, you kind of have to look at the different aspects. So look at charging installations. It's heavily aligned with how the grid infrastructure is today. So more to the metros, less in the rural. And when you look at charging infrastructure planning, on the left is a planning infrastructure in Northern California as an example. And on the right is an example of the deployment in Southern California. The numbers on the red on top are level 2, numbers on the bottom, level 1. And what you find out is that sometimes certain areas get more chargers than others. So is there inequity in how the charging infrastructure actually is laid out? So it's time to take an approach to a decentralized, decarbonized, and sustainable power for EV charging. And that was the inception of eBoost. Essentially, we call it EV charging at the edge. Quick background on Pioneer Power Solutions. We are a publicly traded company on NASDAQ. We've been around for about 30 plus years. Pre-2020, we were in the circuit breaker, transformer, all things switchgear, power, critical power asset, backup power, both equipment and service. And into 2020, we took a different approach. We started focusing on 2 areas. One was distributed energy and microgrids. And so eBlock is a compact integrated power aggregation storage distribution product that essentially serves as a BESS on steroids is the best way to describe it. And then there's eBoost, which we're going to talk about today, charging with mobility.
So I kind of remember that we were looking at all kinds of different green fuels at the beginning, and we tried quite a few of them. Scott, maybe you can run through the decision that we made to use propane at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liana.
Hey, Scott, this is Tony. Just let me make an announcement. Everybody that's on, can you please mute yourself so we don't hear the background noise? We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
Also, if you have questions, we're going to take questions at the end, but if you want to also put them in the chat, we'll make sure to address them as well. Yeah, Liana, thank you. So yeah, we did look at numerous fuels and looking at green fuels as we look to devise a solution. So one was hydrogen, but what we found is there was a lack of commercial availability and of course, actually lack of affordability for it. We looked at natural gas, but of course, there's a challenge of large volume transportation of it. So that led us to propane, which is a green fuel. If you look at the US grid right now, the carbon intensity of the US grid is actually relatively high. It's about 140 because about a third of it is run off of coal, 2/3 natural gas. You then look at other fuels, diesel, gasoline, and you get to propane, green fuel. Now, of course, there's a march to net zero, which we all want to do. If you look at the California grid, which is kind of the gold standard, they're using a lot more renewable fuels. They're using solar, they're using wind as well. So they're incorporating all this in, getting a carbon intensity down to about 40. However, what we're seeing is the advent now of renewable propane. So for instance, in California, places in the Midwest, New England, where renewable propane is available and growing, it's dropping the carbon intensity down to about 20. And coming next year, will be something called dimethyl ether. And it's an additive. You put it in at about 20% mix, and it brings the net carbon intensity close to zero. So that, Liana, is why we chose propane. So I want to talk a little bit about eBoost, and this is a version called the generator on a truck. Now, there are numerous form factors for the product, but there are 5 tenets that, and kind of 5 pillars that we reside on regarding the solution. So one is mobility. All right, so we believe that EV charging needs to be wherever and whenever. In this case, there's a Tesla that ran out of charge in the back forests of Hawaii. I guess if I were going to run out of charge, that's probably where I'd want to run out. Another part we look at is power up. So we want always available backup power, because it's not only about charging electric vehicles, but oftentimes backup power. These solutions also have the option to provide power on demand. As Gio alluded to, there, of course, grid resiliency is a big issue. So we are off grid, but of course, always on for power. I mentioned briefly why we look from a sustainability perspective at green fuel and propane and its march to net zero. And then finally, we find the more remote people go, the more need they have for connectivity. So we work with, some of the American Indian tribes in Minnesota. We work with some very remote mining areas where Wi-Fi connectivity also ends up being important. So this is a blowout of the GOAT. Now, although it's in this specific form factor, there are many forms it comes in, but these are the fundamental building blocks of the solution. So you've got in this case, 90 kW propane generator running a 50 kW fast charger, being fueled by 2 propane tanks. Up in the middle, we can see the selector switch. So if ancillary power is needed, you can get 480, 240, or 120 volts. And just to the left of that, we have communication access and backhaul through either an LTE mesh, looking at the strongest cellular signals, or actually up through a Starlink satellite. Also on it are solar panels, and those are really for managing and powering on inboard batteries, really for parasitic loads, because we're monitoring at all times the different areas here. We're looking at the functionality of the charger, making sure the generator is running properly. We look at propane tank fuel levels, so we can actually ping the remote or local propane generator or propane dealer. So looking quickly at the eBoost realm, it's the real-time monitoring that's on these systems. It's looking at everything on there from a hardware and software perspective, providing 24/7 monitoring of it. If need be, so for instance, if one of these units were in the back road somewhere, it's dark out, someone comes by, we have Wi-Fi connectivity, either through the mesh or satellite, as well as lighting and security cameras. So there are 4 form factors that we've had customers need for different use cases. One is simply by the charger size. The eBoost Mini is on a skid. It powers somewhere between 30 kW and 100 kW chargers, depending on the need. Those are often used by, for instance, electric vehicle truck manufacturers, where they want to demo their vehicles in remote areas, have their dealers have power long before the grid can get there, or even provide it to their customers who want to start using electric vehicles, but again, have to wait for power to be put in. The eBoost GOAT is more of your AAA model, right? It's emergency power running anywhere from 50 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt chargers, and can be brought and imported anywhere. So we see fleets, for instance, not only having their charging infrastructure in place, but having an emergency charging vehicle should one of their fleet run out of power. There's the eBoost Mobile, which we increase up the power to 50 kilowatts to 180 kilowatts for chargers. And those are often used, it could be remote areas, could be mining areas, could be parking lots that have a large number of cars. There's something that we look at as a humanoid spike. It's anywhere you have large numbers of people and for short periods of time, like sustainable concerts. And you may want to have power there, but not want to actually put in infrastructure. And then the eBoost Pod, which is for the highest levels of power from 90 kilowatts to 600 kilowatts. Think about the NEVI requirements, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, where every 50 miles you have to have 600 kilowatts of power running 450 kilowatt chargers.
So if you could also address how we are assisting the utilities, since we have always issues with the infrastructure that is there. How do we assist the utilities in making the grid available, making electricity available for the chargers, and so advancing the EV charging?
Yes, Liana. So we know the utilities are at the heart of advancing EV charging, and we think ourselves as a partner in that journey. So right now, if you are a customer or a utility, this kind of displays the timeline you're looking at EV make ready. And it varies depending on where you are and what utility you're working with. But essentially, it's a long time frame, especially if there is the grid modernization involved. It could be much longer. So what we look at, another part of it is also the EV charging infrastructure costs. So here you're looking at a make ready and all the components that go with it. So there's the material, obviously the EVSE, which is the charger itself, but there are site-specific electrical and civil work that needs to be done. Obviously, there are design costs from engineering, permitting, and then the installation costs, not just from the site perspective, but also possibly on the utility infrastructure if it needs to be upgraded. So in certain places, the investment is quite high. So this is where we can come in and we can help defer some of the early CapEx investments. And when we looked at eBoost as helping with the make ready, there are two elements to this. There's a temporary aspect and a permanent. So when we come in with any of our platforms, it can be in place while the make ready is happening. And then when it is ready, it can be either forklifted away, driven away, or it can be towed away or on a flatbed truck. But the other aspect of eBoost is that we have a permanent aspect or a way to fortify your infrastructure. So in that situation, we can provide you with an ATS or automatic transfer switch, which the grid connection would be tied into, and you all of a sudden have resiliency. So it can be utilized as part of your microgrid or distributed energy generation infrastructure on site. And when we set out, we were looking at high-speed charging, but we quickly realized there was as much a need for level 2 DCFC. So we can provide level 2 charging, anywhere from 2 to 10, as much as you want to expand, in an off-grid format on a skid at a depot within 6 to 8 weeks. Or if you have a higher need and you have a fleet that goes out further, then we can be there to help along the route. So that type of the larger platforms are available in 10 to 12 weeks. So we're trying to look at all types of categories, not just last mile delivery, but over the road as well.
Right. So,
And Scott, can you give us the use cases for our product so everybody knows where they can use what we're bringing to the table?
absolutely. How mmany use cases would you like to see?
A lot.
A lot. Oh, good. Okay. So from the eBoost Mini perspective, it's what's very nice about it, and Gio mentioned just a moment ago, is it's expandable. So in some cases you want to have 1 or 2 chargers running. In some cases we have airport parking lots where they don't want to dig up the entire area, and they'll put in 10, 20, 30 chargers running off of these skid units. We're also seeing it with schools that are putting in electric buses, and they want to be able to charge a large number of buses simultaneously overnight. But again, waiting, they're told, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years before the infrastructure can be in place. Another part is just, for instance, OEM truck manufacturers, where they want to demo, do ride and drives, and be able to have a power source where there's not a guarantee otherwise. For the eBoost Goat, again, it's really that AAA model where it's on-demand charging, whether it's an Uberized model, it's a rescue vehicle. So if the electric car gets bricked because it ran out of charge, you want to get it off the road as quickly as possible. People want to get home. So we call this complete mobility. From the eBoost Mobile, again, it's necessary mobility. I alluded earlier to the humanoid spike, where you have sporting events and concerts going on. You have people that are just pop up in large volumes. For instance, here we have a football stadium. There's 16 football games a year. 8 of them are at home. They're going to put in some electric vehicle infrastructure, but by no means a necessary amount to meet the number of electric vehicles coming. By being able to have a few of these in place, renting them, for instance, over the weekend, they can get it and use it. We're seeing a lot of sustainable concerts starting. So a lot of the musicians want to have sustainable concerts. And as they travel around the country, they want to be able to use clean fuels, charge electric trucks that are moving them, charge electric vehicles that are visiting. Another comes to the really large trucks. So when you think about your Class 8 vehicles in distribution centers, and those are coming and going, and their time is money. So while they're unloading and loading, one of these mobile units can go around to the trucks and charge them so that they're charging at the same time they're loading and unloading. From the pod perspective, we call it as required mobility. This is where you've got remote parts of your highway that don't have the grid nearby. You want to be able to charge. You can plop one of these down very rapidly. Another thing that's nice is as EV charging gets going, are you putting your EV charging in the right place? Right. So because these units are mobile, you can put your chargers in a certain location and see is that where people want to charge? Or maybe it wasn't at this exit. Maybe it was an exit 4 miles down the road that's actually much better. So instead of putting in the cost of putting in infrastructure, ripping it out, instead you can figure out where to go first. Truck stops are a big area as well, where you've got a large number of large vehicles, or gas stations. Now, the gas stations, if you think about it, they're not really making their money off of gas. Where are they making it? They're making it off of their slushies, the lottery tickets, cigarettes, food. As electric comes into place more, they're going to be able to want to add it, but they're not always in locations where the grid is going to be upgraded in any near time, if at all. This gives them the ability to pop it in place. Also, state and national parks, again, that are remote enough that may not have the proper infrastructure, one can put in place electric vehicle chargers very easily, because propane is readily available, and actually even more available the further you go away, the more rural and remote you go. It's very easy to get the electric vehicles charged. So from the NEVI perspective and the alternative fuel corridor, what if the grid doesn't go and reach the corridor, right? So the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure law says that EV chargers along the alternative fuel corridor are supposed to be at least every 50 miles, within a mile of the exit, and 40% in disadvantaged areas, which, unfortunately, have lesser grid access as well. So that's why we have the eBoost Pod NEVI version, which meets the requirements where they're requiring all of these stations have at least 600 kilowatts of power. They have to be able to support 4 150 kilowatt chargers simultaneously. And for us, it's all about charging the EV frontier. Wherever that frontier is pushing out to, we want to be able to make sure that electric vehicles can get there, and more importantly, can get back. Couple examples as well to think about. Some are gridlocked areas, right? So they're not remote, but they are, there's a high density of people there, and on a very little amount of land, where they can't actually add in the electric vehicle infrastructure because there's just not enough grid to support that. So it's very easy to pop in an eBoost skid, put on it 10 level 2 chargers, and now you have charging for everyone. I alluded earlier to the humanoid spike, and it's again where you're having thousands, hundreds of thousands of people come to an event, and they're doing it in a very short period of time, but they do want EV charging. Some infrastructure will be put in place, but to meet a certain level and not a peak level. Very easy to pop in temporary eBoost mobile units to be able to charge them. Once that's done, they move away to the next humanoid spike. Corridor charging congestion is a large concern going out there. So I want you to think about holidays, 4th of July, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Large numbers of people are going. Now, even with the electric vehicle infrastructure that's being put in place, it's being put in place to meet the norm, the average requirement in areas. But we're talking about huge spikes here of congestion. And one thing that's going to be needed is the ability in high traffic locations to be able to bring in temporary charging to meet those peak areas, and then they can be moved to the next location. Emergency management is really important area on a lot of minds as well, right? Gio talked at the beginning, right? There are fires in the West. There are tornadoes in the South and Midwest. There are hurricanes in the East, flooding. When these events occur, not only do they need power, but they need charging power. We're talking with we're down at the CCC event down in Cocoa recently, and they were talking about the concern of a hurricane coming and you have 100 Teslas trying to get out of the Keys, and a large number of them have probably forgotten to charge.
Actually, Inca, go away. Stop bothering me.
You want to be able to charge anywhere, anytime. From an EV adoption perspective, so for instance, a lot of people are in leased buildings and aren't going to be the ones to put in infrastructure, but they are encouraging their employees and others to get electric vehicles. And in 8 weeks, one can pop in an eBoost skid with a dozen chargers to charge the cars. And if the lease changes, one can easily pick them up and move them out. I talked earlier about electric vehicle buses with schools moving to electric vehicles. I think the number is $7.5 billion is being put in to move the diesel buses and all their fumes over to electric. But many of the schools are finding, even after they get their first buses, they're realizing, wait a minute, the infrastructure is going to take 2 years to get in place. These make it very easy, whether it's a school bus fleet or even a larger tour bus fleet using much more power to charge, to be able to put in immediate infrastructure, be able to accelerate the adoption to electric vehicles, but ensure at the same time we have enough power available. A few final examples. One is around the tourism area. So hotels are already seeing that their customers are arriving with electric vehicles, but they don't yet have the infrastructure in place because they want to keep the people coming to them. It's easy for them to just drop in an electric vehicle charging station. This way, it's off grid. They don't need to upgrade the utilities, or they can wait until those utilities do arrive. Another way that hospitalities, restaurants, retail are finding to attract customers is to put in electric vehicle charging. And they're putting some underground in grid, and they are finding that they can't put enough in place fast enough. And they're also finding that people spend more money and more time when doing it. Target looked at when they put in electric vehicle charging, people were spending 40 minutes longer shopping and buying things. I alluded earlier to the corridor charging congestion, and this is a case where this is just a dirt lot most of the year, but come the 4th of July, come Thanksgiving, boom, suddenly there are a number of eBoost pods in place. You'll see also the food trucks arriving as well, and now you have an EV haven pop up for the need when there is high demand for EV charging. Again, the gas stations don't want to be left out. Companies like Shell, for instance, are putting huge money into putting EV infrastructure in place, making wholly EV solutions as well. But there are many gas stations that just want to be able to add on electric vehicle charging as the gas demand diminishes or as the EV demand accelerates. They have the land. Sometimes the infrastructure isn't going to get there anytime soon, or sometimes they're in locations, even in cities where there's just not enough power and it's not going to get there. So I want to kind of wrap up with just a few photos of eBoost in the wild. This is a skid that was shown at the ACT Expo. It's the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo out in California. Navistar actually uses it. You see their trucks behind to charge their vehicles when they do demos, when they do ride and drives, as well as providing it to their dealers to get them accelerated, and then provide it to people who are piloting their trucks so that they can actually use them. This was the eBoost GOAT generator on a truck. We were down at a CCC event down in Florida. And what was interesting here is we keep hearing about 20%, 25% the chargers don't work. Well, in this case, there were 3 chargers on the side of the building and none of them worked. And it was an EV event, so you had a lot of electric vehicles. So we had the people from Bluebird come over to charge with us, other electric trucks. This happens to be the Orlando Utility Commission wanted to get charged up before they headed across Florida. And then the eBoost Mobile, which is in this case running 120 kilowatt DCFC charger, as well as 2 level 2 chargers. And it's a very large, it's actually a 400 kilowatt generator because it's also used for backup power for one of the tribes in northern Michigan. So here we go again. These are just a number of examples of the chargers that are available.
I think it's very clear why eBoost. Maybe Gio, you can tell us why eBoost now at present.
Sure, Liana. So, when we looked at the EV infrastructure, even with the spend that we have ahead in the next 4 years, we're going to have gaps. And the gaps could happen, one, because of just geography. It could be the area is too rural and infrastructure couldn't reach there in a practical manner. Or secondarily, it could be cost. Just to run infrastructure or do the civil work could be too intensive to do it. There's always practicality. And what I mean by that is there are areas in multiple cities where there's a huge amount of population and very condensed living condition. There's no put in infrastructure to bring in charging, and this type of solution can alleviate that. There's always regulatory. There are certain areas, whether it be in the national forests or other areas where there may not be a way to lay the infrastructure. This is a very good way, especially because propane is so resilient. And then finally, 5, which is equity. And this is just, it happens in all types of planning, right? We intend to do the best, but sometimes some communities get left behind. And is that fair or not fair? Well, rather than be the judge of that, we have a product that we can use to eliminate the digital divide and technology trench. So we look at ourselves as a Swiss Army knife. We're kind of a tool that you can use however you want. And we hope that we're able to help you.
So what I want to do is open it up to questions. What I'm going to do is go through. So there are a lot of questions popping up on the chat, which I thank you for. What I will do is start at the top and head down them as they come. So if you have questions, please go into the chat and either I will answer them or Gio or Liana. So the first one is from Bert. So thank you very much for the first question. The country has rolling brownouts every year during the summer. What effect will this influx of EVs on the power grid? What is it going to have? Yeah, what is it we're going to have on the power grid? So it's enormous consequences, certainly. So as EVs come out here, if you think about it, to charge Teslas, for instance, if you have a bank of EV chargers for Teslas, that's about the same amount of power as a subdivision of houses. We look at, there are now looking at EVs as being bidirectional because you could run your house for 3 days off the charge on a Tesla. So it is enormous. It's something that the grids are very aware of. And it's one reason why we as a company were formed is we realized that it's going to take some time for the electric grid to get everything in place, especially specific areas. And we see we can provide a solution that will get people to net zero while waiting for the power they need from the grid, and the grid to expand, and also to expand into renewable fuels or sources. So the next is from Pam. Will the renewable propane be available as an option in Pennsylvania or just in California? When in Pennsylvania? So it's currently available in California, a number of states in the Midwest, as well as in New England. I can get you the details on exactly when it will be in Pennsylvania, but there's a rapid move towards renewable propane now that it is largely available through mass manufacture. It's expanding very quickly, so I can get you those details. Are these available to rent to fill that gap while waiting for the grid electric upgrade, or just ownership? So great, that's also another question from Pam. So we provide them for purchase, we provide them for lease or lease to own. We're working with a number of the large rental organizations, right, the national brands, to work with them to be able to provide them for renting, again, for this humanoid spike need. So really we're trying to be as flexible as possible, because we see that the need is strong, and different organizations need to acquire it in different ways. So all of the above. Jason has a question. Do you have an option to connect hardline to natural gas? So although we run on propane, we have been in the power business, generator business for 30 years. So in fact, there are a couple cases where they want to hook up directly to natural gas. So yes, we can do that as well. Some organizations find that's what they have on site. They want to move to such a fuel, but yes, we can connect it up directly to natural gas. Bert has another question. What are the costs for the trailers, goats, etc.? So I showed 4 models, but the way to understand it is that because it seems that every customer's need is a little different, right? So are they trying to charge a 30 kW charger? Are they trying to charge 150 kW charger? Is it a single charger, or maybe it's a dozen level 2 chargers? So it's broad, it's very specific to what the need is, but the skids start at around $100,000 for the simplest model, where you get all the way up to the eBoost pod Nevi, which is going to be in the high 6 figures. And again, I'd be glad to talk with you about the specific need, architect it out, and go through very specific pricing. Harold has a question. Do the pod options placed in rural locations or near parks have an enclosed restroom for individuals to use while they are waiting for the car to charge? So that's
So Scott, I'll take that one. So as the team at eBoost knows, this is at the heart of one of my passions is we all know how porta potties, they experience it. Trying to figure out a better way, especially for women and children, to have a better experience, especially when we're talking sustainable concerts and things like that. So it's something we're working on integrating. So it's a very timely app question. We haven't released one yet, but it isn't a technology we're integrating.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question is from Zachary. shouldn't there be a development of solar panels on vehicles so a vehicle can charge as it is driven, can make the panels so transparent as not to be noticeable? Is this realistic? Why can't an EV be equipped with an alternator that can continue to charge the battery while the wheels are in motion? So, so the first part about solar panels, the challenge is that each panel puts out so little power. So yes, one could certainly add solar panels on the top of cars, and actually I'd expect to see that sometime in the future, but there's so small an amount of charge coming out that it wouldn't be enough to sustain the charge needed by that car. And in terms of having the car kind of self-generate power, what's nice is the cars and trucks have regenerative charging. So as you brake or loosen up on the gas, it slows the car down as it recharges the batteries. Again, it's not enough to do it completely, but it helps in the process. Harold asks a question. Do you have a charging option for urbanized and downtown situations where consumers park on the street each evening and they have a need to charge their EV? So yeah, so that's a great one too. So that was similar to the one I talked about the housing congestion, right? So it's easy enough to put down an eBoost skid down, the eBoost Mini, have the skid there, and then a dozen chargers running off of it. What's nice is you can put it down anywhere at any time, and so it's a very, very doable. Let's see. Here's a great question from Ted. How are these mobile units charging themselves? Right, that's a great question. So we are propane based. So you notice in the photos we have propane tanks, and what we do is, because we're monitoring these systems 24/7, we're able to ping the local propane dealer, and they come and automatically refill the tanks. And the tanks can be refilled while you're charging, so there's no interrupt in charging. So Bert, I like you. I don't know who you are. We'll have to talk later, but you've got lots of good questions. The average stadium size holds 60,000 spectators. Yes. Let's say 2 people per vehicle, so 30,000 vehicles. What is logistics and cost to set up the chargers? So as you see, it's the law of large numbers. When you're trying to charge for that number of vehicles, it's a huge cost of infrastructure. And Gio talked about the cost and time to put in permanent infrastructure, and in that case, for that many cars. And you'd look at in this case, what I believe would probably happen in most stadiums is they would offer this as a premium service. So if you have season tickets, et cetera. So that brings it down to maybe 10% of
Hey, Scott, this is Tony. And I want to add on that comment that, we've been doing this a long time. Most people charge at their home. I mean, if you're going to the stadium, you're usually not, 3 or 4 hours away, and going to do that many miles. So, it's not unrealistic that people will, if they have electric vehicles and it's free charging, of course, they're going to want to use it. But at the same time, most people, in 90% of all electric vehicle charging is done at the home. And with the range of the vehicles these days, it's a non-issue for them to be charging at a stadium sometimes. Sometimes they come from a little bit further and might need it. But I think for the majority of all travelers and attendees, I think they're going to be using their home charging more than they would use it at a stadium. So I don't think that you're ever going to need to see 30,000 chargers at a stadium.
Yeah, you're right. You're very right. And yeah, so that's why we see it as it's going to be a premium service where there'll be a few that will want to pay for that fast charging. David asks, so Gio, maybe you want to touch this. What are the permitting requirements?
Right. So in stadium, I wanted to highlight something. So we're in conversation with a couple of different large venues. And the reality is, even in the near future, if a quarter or a 1/8 of the came in, the biggest difficulty is leaving or exiting a large venue. And you can take quite possibly an hour to leave. And people come into these venues in different states of charge. So what we're working on is a solution with local rental generator companies to basically provide eBoost for that event. Because even if you install that many chargers and they were all charging at the same time, the utility would go through a brownout. So it's impossible. So what you need is something off-grid during those 4 to 6 hours to charge, and then they're gone after that. So that's the way to solve some of these type of humanoid spikes. And in regards to the permitting, so because we're mobile, a lot of the permitting is not, there are actually very few required. Some states, specific counties have certain regulations on propane. But again, on mobile solutions, we're DOT compliant and we only transport to the limits. So there are very few to no permitting requirements that we go through.
Hey, Scott, Gio, and Liana, we only have a few more minutes, so why don't you kind of breeze through some of these questions, and we will address all the other questions. I'll make a copy of this in the chat, and then we can have you answer some of them offline. But go through some of the rest of the questions and pick out a couple that you think would be appropriate to the audience.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take last three here. So from Bert, again, one more. Thank you very much. Do these mobile stations generate noise, and if so, how much, and is it loud? So one thing we do with the generators is we do a lot of sound dampening and baffling to reduce the noise and really keep it at a minimum. Do you have from Kellen, do you have a network of propane dealers you're prepared to work with? Yes, we do. We work with a couple of the national ones and national networks, so that our systems, as we deploy them, we just put in the location which we know of, and then let them know the regional areas who to charge, and ping them when the charging is needed. And from Wesley, how frequently does the propane need to be refilled on the various trailer pod options? And you also offer that as a service. So it's a really good question. So what we do is we talk to the customers as we're building out the units to understand what the frequency of refueling is desired, right? So do they want to go days, weeks? And then from there can put together the solution from how much propane storage do we have there, to make sure that that frequency is set appropriately. And yes, we do offer that service. And another question came in on, do we support only specific chargers or any chargers? So we're charger agnostic. So, in the many examples we showed, we're working with different size chargers as well as different charger manufacturers. So with this at the end, with Charles, who says, thank you very much for an informative webinar. Thank you for taking the time with us today.
Great. Thanks so much. I want to thank all the attendees. We will again have this recording link after this, probably up tomorrow on our websites. But what I'll do is I'll email it to everybody that has registered. So it's that way you have it personally in your own email, and you can click on the link if you had any, if you want to send it to somebody to view, or if you had any additional questions, please contact us. I want to thank Leanna, Gio, and Scott, and Rick Price for, this great presentation. I have a feeling we're going to be working with you guys a lot more in the future. So thanks everyone for attending. And if you have any questions or any comments, please send them to Rick or I, and we will pass them along. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tony and Rick.